The palm orchards of Hail lie before us. We halt by the side of an old ruined watchtower to prepare ourselves for our entry into the town, for old Arabian custom, always concerned with personal aesthetics, demands of the traveler that he enter the town in his best attire, fresh and clean as if he had just mounted his dromedary. And so we utilize our remaining water for washing our hands and faces, clip our neglected beards, and pull our widest tunics from the saddlebags. We brush the weeks of desert dust from our abayas and from the gaily colored tassels of our saddlebags, and dress our camels in their best finery. And now we are ready to present ourselves in Hayy. This town is far more Arabian than, say, Baghdad or Medina. It does not contain any elements from non-Arab countries and peoples. It is pure and unadulterated like a bowl of freshly drawn milk. No foreign dress is visible in the bazaar, only loose Arabian abayas, kufiyas, and igals. The streets are much cleaner than those in any other city of the Middle East, cleaner even than any other town in Nejd, which is noted for its un-Eastern cleanliness, probably because the people of this land, having always been free, have retained a greater measure of self-respect than elsewhere in the East. The houses, built of horizontal layers of packed mud, are in good repair, with the exception of the demolished city walls which bear witness to the last war between Ibn Saud and the house of Ibn Rashid, and of Ibn Saud's conquest of the town in 1921. The hammers of the coppersmiths pound into shape all manner of vessels, the saw of the carpenters bite shriekingly into wood, shoemakers tap the soles of sandals, camels loaded with fuel and skins full of butter make their way through the crowds, other camels, brought in by Bedouins for sale, fill the air with their bellowing. Gaudy saddlebags from Al-Hassa are being fingered by experienced hands. The auctioneers, an ever-recurring fixture in any Arabian town, move up and down the bazaar, and with loud cries offer their goods for sale. Here and there you can see hunting falcons jumping up and down on their wooden perches, tethered by thin leather thongs. Honey-colored saluqi hounds stretch their graceful limbs lazily in the sun. Thin Bedouins in worn abayas, well-dressed servants and bodyguards of the Amir, almost all of them from the southern provinces, mingle with traders from Baghdad, Basra, and Kuwait, and the natives of Hayl. These natives, that is, the men, for of the women you see hardly more than the black abaya which conceals head and body, belong to one of the most handsome races in the world. All the grace of appearance and movement to which the Arab nation has ever attained seems to be embodied in this tribe of Shammar, of which the pre-Islamic poets sang, "In the highlands live the men of steel and the proud, chaste women." When we arrive before the Emir's castle, where we intend to spend the next 2 days, we find our host holding court in the open outside the castle gates. Amir ibn Musa'ad belongs to the Jilui branch of the house of Ibn Saud, and is a brother-in-law of the king. One of the most powerful of the king's governors, he is called Amir of the North, because he holds sway not only over the Jebel Shammar province, but over the whole of northern Najd, up to the confines of Syria and Iraq, an area almost as large as France. The Emir, who is an old friend of mine, and a few Bedouin sheikhs from the steppes, are sitting on the long, narrow brick bench built along the castle wall. In a long row at their feet crouch Ibn Musad's Rajajil, the men-at-arms, with rifles and silver-sheathed scimitars, who never leave him throughout the day, not so much for protection as for prestige. Next to them the falconers with their birds perched on gloved fists, lower servants, Bedouins, a throng of retainers, great and small, down to the stable boys, all feeling equal to one another as men, in spite of the differences in their stations. And how could it be otherwise in this land, where you never address anyone as my lord, except God, in prayer? Facing them in a large semicircle squat the many Bedouins and townspeople who are bringing their complaints and quarrels before the Emir for settlement. We make our camels lie down outside the circle, hand them over to the care of a couple of retainers who have rushed over to us, and proceed towards the Emir. He rises, and all who have been sitting by his side on the bench and on the ground before him rise with him. He stretches his hand towards us. "Ahlan wa sahlan, and may God grant you life." I kiss the Emir on the tip of his nose and his forehead. He kisses me on both cheeks and pulls me to the bench by his side. Zayd finds a place among the Rajajil. Ibn Musa'ad introduces me to his other guests. Some of the faces are new to me and some are familiar from previous years. Among these is Ghazban ibn Rimal, supreme sheikh of the Sinjara Shammar, that delightful old warrior whom I always call uncle. Nobody would guess from his almost tattered appearance that he is one of the mightiest chieftains of the north, and has so loaded his young wife with gold and jewels that, according to popular belief, 2 slave maidens have to support her when she wants to leave her huge tent, which rests on 16 poles. His eyes twinkle as he embraces me and whispers into my ear, "No new wife yet?" To which I can only reply with a smile and a shrug. Amir ibn Musa'ad must have overheard this quip, for he laughs aloud and says, "It is coffee and not wives that a tired traveler needs," and calls out, "Qahwa!" "Qahwa!" repeats the servant nearest the Amir, and the one at the farthest end of the row takes up the call, "Qahwa!" and so on until the ceremonious command reaches the castle gate and re-echoes from within. In no time a servant appears, bearing the traditional brass coffee pot in his left hand and several small cups in his right hand, pours out the first for the Amir, the second for me, and then serves the other guests in the order of their rank. The cup is refilled once or twice, and when a guest indicates he has had enough, it is filled again, and passed on to the next man. The Amir is apparently curious to know the results of my journey to the frontier of Iraq, but he betrays his interest only in brief questions as to what befell me on the way, reserving a fuller inquiry until we are alone. Then he resumes his judicial hearing, which my arrival has interrupted. Such an informal court of justice would be inconceivable in the West. The Emir, as ruler and judge, is of course assured of all respect, but there is no trace of subservience in the respect which the Bedouins show him. Each of the plaintiffs and defendants proudly rests in the consciousness of his free humanity. Their gestures are not hesitant, their voices are often loud and assertive, and everyone speaks to the Emir as to an older brother, calling him, as in Bedouin custom with the king himself, by his first name and not by his title. There is no trace of haughtiness in Ibn Musad's bearing. His handsome face with its short black beard, his middle-sized, somewhat stocky figure, speak of that unstudied self-restraint and easy dignity which in Arabia so often goes hand in hand with great power. He is grave and curt. With authoritative words he immediately decides the simpler cases and refers the more complicated ones, which require learned jurisprudence, to the Qadi of the district. It is not easy to be the supreme authority in a great Bedouin region. An intimate knowledge of the various tribes, family relationships, leading personalities, tribal grazing areas, past history and present idiosyncrasies is needed to hit upon the correct solution in the excited complexity of a Bedouin plate. Tact of heart is as important here as sharpness of intellect, and both must work together with needle-point precision in order to avoid a mistake, for in the same way as Bedouins never forget a favor done to them, they never forget a judicial decision which they consider unjust. On the other hand, a just decision is almost always accepted with good grace, even by those against whom it has gone. Ibn Musa'ad measures up to these requirements probably better than any other of Ibn Saud's emirs. He is so rounded, so quiet, and so without inner contradictions that his instinct almost always shows him the right way whenever his reason reaches a dead end. He is a swimmer in life. He lets himself be borne by the waters and masters them by adapting himself to them. 2 ragged Bedouins are now presenting their quarrel before him with excited words and gestures. Bedouins are, as a rule, difficult to deal with. There is always something unpredictable in them, a sensitive excitability which knows no compromise, always heaven and hell close to each other. But now I can see how Ibn Musa'ad parts their seething passions and smooths them with his quiet words. One might think he would order the one to be silent while the other pleads for what he claims to be his right. But no, he lets them talk both at the same time, outshout each other, and only occasionally steps in with a little word here and question there. To be immediately submerged in their passionate arguments, he gives in, and seemingly retreats, only to cut in again a little later with an appropriate remark. It is an entrancing spectacle, this adaptation of the judge's own mind to a reality so conflictingly interpreted by 2 angry men. Not so much a search for truth in a juridical sense as the slow unveiling of a hidden objective reality. The Emir approaches this goal by fits and starts, draws out the truth as if by a thin string, slowly and patiently, almost imperceptibly to both plaintiff and defendant, until they suddenly stop, look at each other in puzzlement, and realize judgment has been delivered, a judgment so obviously just that it requires no further explanation. Whereupon one of the 2 stands up hesitantly, straightens his abaya, and tugs his erstwhile opponent by the sleeve in an almost friendly manner. "Come," and both retreat, still somewhat bewildered and at the same time relieved, mumbling the blessing of peace over the Emir. The scene is wonderful, a real piece of art, a prototype, it seems to me, of that fruitful collaboration between jurisprudence and justice, which in Western courts and parliaments is still in its infancy, but stands here in all its perfection in the dusty market square before the castle of an Arab Amir. Ibn Musad, reclining indolently against the mud wall, takes up the next case, his face strong, furrowed, looking out of deep-set eyes which warm and pierce is the face of a real leader of men, a masterly representative of the greatest quality of his race, common sense of the heart. Some of the others present obviously feel a similar admiration. A man sitting on the ground before me, he is a Bedouin of the tribe of Harb, and one of the Emir's men-at-arms, cranes his neck up toward me with a smile on his face. Is he not like that Sultan of whom Mutanabbi says, I met him when his gleaming sword was sheathed, I saw him when it streamed with blood, and always found him best of all mankind, but best of all in him was still his noble mind. It does not strike me as incongruous to hear an unlettered Bedouin quote verses of a great Arabian poet who lived in the 10th century, certainly not as incongruous as it would have been to hear a Bavarian peasant quote Goethe or an English stevedore William Blake or Shelley. For despite the more general spread of education in the West, the highlights of Western culture are not really shared by the average European or American, while on the other hand, very wide segments of uneducated, sometimes even illiterate Muslims do share consciously, daily, in the cultural achievements of their past. Just as this Bedouin here has been able to call to mind an appropriate verse from Mutanabbi to illustrate a situation of which he was a witness, many a ragged Persian without schooling, a water carrier, a porter in a bazaar, a soldier in an outlying frontier post, carries in his memory innumerable verses of Hafiz, or Jami, or Firdausi, and weaves them with evident enjoyment into his everyday conversation. Although they have largely lost that creativeness which made their cultural heritage so great, these Muslim people have even now a direct living contact with its summit. I still remember the day when I made this discovery in the bazaar of Damascus. I was holding in my hands a vessel, a large bowl of baked clay. It had a strangely solemn shape, big and round, like a somewhat flattened sphere of almost musical proportions. Out of the roundness of its wall, which had in it the tenderness of a woman's cheek, two handles bent outward in perfect curves that would have done honor to the Greek amphora. They had been kneaded by hand. I could still discern the fingerprints of a humble potter in the clay. Around the vessel's inward-turned rim he had etched with swift, sure strokes of his stylus a delicate arabesque like the hint of a rose garden in bloom. He had been working quickly, almost negligently, when he created this splendid simplicity which brought to mind all the glories of Seljuk and Persian pottery one so admires in the museums of Europe. For he had not intended to create a work of art. All that he was making was a cooking pot, nothing but a cooking pot such as a fellah or a Bedouin can buy any day in any bazaar for a few copper coins. I knew the Greeks had created similar or even greater perfection, probably in cooking pots as well, for they too, water carrier and market porter, soldier and potter, had truly shared in a culture that did not rest merely on the creative excitement of few select individuals, on a few peaks which only men of genius could reach, but was common to all. Their pride in things beautiful, the things which were part of that culture, was part of their day-by-day doings as well, a continuous partaking in a joint, living possession. As I held that vessel in my hands, I knew, blessed are people who cook in such pots their daily meals, blessed are they whose claim to a cultural heritage is more than an empty boast. Wilt thou not grant me the pleasure of dining with me now, O Muhammad? Amir ibn Musad's voice breaks through my reverie. I look up, and Damascus recedes into the past, where it belongs, and I am sitting once again on the bench by the side of the Emir of the North. The judicial session is apparently over. One by one the litigants depart. Ibn Musad rises, and his guests and men-at-arms rise with him. The throng of the Rajajil parts to make way for us. As we pass under the gateway, they close their ranks and follow us into the castle yard.